You ever watch somebody smile while they destroy the last thing you have left of someone you loved? The smell of wet latex paint hit me before I even opened my front door. Sharp, chemical, fresh enough to sting the back of my throat. My phone buzzed again in my hand. Motion alert after motion alert lighting up the screen at 2:13 in the morning while rain tapped softly against the windows of my little one-story house in Willowbrook Heights. At first I thought somebody was trying to steal copper from the alley again. Then I opened the security feed and felt my stomach drop straight through the floorboards. 3 people stood under portable floodlights beside the mural on the side of my garage. White paint rolled slowly across 18 feet of color like snowfall covering a grave. Thick, dripping lines swallowed every brushstroke I'd spent 6 months painting by hand. The blue wings, the red fire helmet, the little gold halo detail nobody noticed unless they stood close enough. Gone under layers of HOA-approved eggshell white. And standing there in a spotless beige raincoat, holding a Starbucks cup, like she was supervising landscaping work instead of vandalism, was Brenda Whitmore herself. HOA president, self-appointed queen of property values. Her blonde hair sat perfectly curled even in 90% humidity, and her smile looked sharp enough to cut wire. She pointed at the wall, while one of the maintenance guys rolled another strip of paint over my brother Mason's face. I turned the volume up on the camera feed and heard her laugh through the speaker. "Finally," she said. "Now the neighborhood looks civilized again." I didn't move, didn't yell, didn't storm outside. That's what she wanted. My bare feet stayed planted on the cold hardwood floor while rainwater hissed softly through the gutters outside. I just watched. The room smelled like old coffee, spray paint, and the sawdust from the custom frames stacked beside my drafting table. My hands tightened around the phone hard enough to make my knuckles ache, but I kept recording every second, every roller stroke, every HOA logo on their jackets, every reflection from the floodlights bouncing off the puddles in my driveway. Because Brenda made one mistake that night. She thought covering art was the same thing as erasing it. See, that mural wasn't graffiti. It wasn't random street paint or some rebellious tag sprayed by teenagers. That wall carried the last honest memory I had of my younger brother Mason Cole. Firefighter. Engine 14. The guy who could make an entire room laugh with one stupid joke while carrying more pain than anybody realized. 2 years ago, he died after responding to a fentanyl exposure call downtown. And after the funeral, after the casseroles stopped showing up and the sympathy cards dried out on my kitchen counter, painting became the only thing that shut the noise off in my head. So I painted him the way I remembered him. Standing tall in turnout gear with those ridiculous angel wings he would have made fun of me for adding. Kids stopped and took photos with it. Veterans saluted it during Memorial Day weekend. Even the mailman told me it made the block feel human. But Brenda hated it from day one. Said it looked urban. Said it lowered luxury appeal. Said Willowbrook Heights wasn't that kind of neighborhood. And now, at 2:31 a.m., I stood there listening to rain drip from my gutters while she buried my brother under white paint and smiled like she'd finally won. What Brenda Whitmore didn't know was that every second of this little midnight cleanup project was about to turn her precious HOA headquarters into the biggest public spectacle this town had ever seen. By sunrise, the rain had stopped, but the smell of fresh paint still hung over my driveway like burnt plastic and wet drywall. The mural wall looked dead, flat, empty, like somebody had ripped the heartbeat out of the block overnight. I stood there holding a paper cup of gas station coffee gone cold in my hand, while white paint dripped slowly into the gravel below the garage. Neighbors drove past on their way to work pretending not to stare, but I caught them looking. Some slowed down. Some shook their heads. Nobody said a word. That is the thing about HOA neighborhoods. People learn real fast that silence keeps them safe. I reached out and touched the wall with my fingertips. The paint was still tacky. Underneath that cheap HOA white, I could still feel the ridges of Mason's wings pressed into the brick. 6 months of work buried alive in one night. The security camera above my porch gave a soft electronic hum, while footage uploaded automatically into cloud storage. Good. I wanted backups. Lots of them. My name is Ethan Cole. I am 38 years old, and before all this happened, I mostly painted restaurants, gyms, and warehouse exteriors across Central Ohio. Commercial jobs. Long hours. The kind of work where your knees ache after 10 hours on scaffolding and your clothes permanently smell like primer no matter how many times you wash them. Nothing glamorous. But painting walls paid my bills after the divorce, and eventually it became the only thing keeping me sane after Mason died. My little brother had this way of making everybody around him feel lighter. Firefighter, volunteer baseball coach, human golden retriever with steel-toe boots. The guy could walk into a gas station at 6 in the morning and somehow leave with 3 new friends and a fishing invitation. When he passed, this whole neighborhood showed up to the memorial wearing Engine 14 shirts. Even Brenda Whitmore stood there with fake tears and one manicured hand over her chest talking about community strength. 2 months later, she started mailing me violation notices over the mural. The first letter came folded inside a bright red envelope, stamped final warning across the front like I was some kind of criminal. Unapproved exterior imagery negatively affecting community standards. That was the exact phrase. Community standards. I laughed so hard the first time I read it that coffee came out of my nose. The mural had been city approved, fully permitted, signed by the local arts council. There was literally a bronze permit tag mounted beside the wall. But Brenda did not care about permits. Brenda cared about appearances. Willowbrook Heights was her personal showroom. Every lawn exactly trimmed. Every mailbox painted the same shade of black. Every house trying desperately to look richer than it actually was. And me? I ruined the fantasy. I drove a dented white Ford Transit with paint splatter on the bumper. I wore work boots to the grocery store. My garage smelled like aerosol cans and sawdust instead of lavender candles, and staged real estate photos. Brenda once told me during an HOA meeting that my property gave the neighborhood an industrial feeling. Industrial. Like honest work was some kind of disease. Around 9 that morning, my phone buzzed with a notification from the Willowbrook Heights community page. Brenda had already uploaded photos of the repainting job. The caption read, "Another successful neighborhood beautification effort completed overnight thanks to our hardworking HOA volunteers." Volunteers. I zoomed into the picture until the pixels blurred, and there it was reflected perfectly in one of the floodlight stands. My security camera timestamp. Bright blue numbers frozen at 2:17 a.m. Brenda had just posted public evidence of herself destroying a protected mural, and judging by the proud little smile on her face in the photo, she had absolutely no idea what kind of mess she had just painted herself into. The funny thing about people like Brenda Whitmore is they always think power comes from being loud. Loud emails, loud meetings, loud little speeches in clubhouse conference rooms that smell like lemon cleaner and stale coffee. But real power? Real power sits quietly and lets arrogant people dig their own hole one shovel at a time. By noon, the comments under Brenda's community post had already turned ugly. Not for me. For her. At first it was just little things. A sad face emoji from Mrs. Alvarez down the block. A firefighter badge reaction from one of Mason's old station buddies. Then somebody reposted an older photo of the mural before it got covered, and suddenly people started remembering. That wall was for Mason. My kids love that painting. Did the HOA seriously destroy memorial art at 2 in the morning? Brenda tried deleting comments, but screenshots spread faster than she could scrub them. Every refresh brought another angry reply. The soft buzz of my phone notifications filled the kitchen while I sat at the counter eating microwaved leftovers straight from the container. Rainwater still dripped outside from the gutters in slow, uneven taps. Somewhere down the street, a lawn mower hummed to life. Regular suburban sounds. But under all of it, I could feel something shifting. Brenda had crossed a line people could actually see. Around 3 in the afternoon, I drove downtown to the city records office in my old transit van. The air inside smelled like dust, old paper, and overheated copy machines. Ceiling fans spun lazily above rows of filing cabinets that probably had not moved since the 1980s. A clerk named Diane recognized me the second I walked in. "You were the mural guy, right?" she asked quietly. I nodded. Her expression tightened. What they did was awful. Then she leaned closer across the counter. "You should look at the Willowbrook redevelopment files from 2019. That sentence changed everything. 2 hours later, I sat surrounded by stacks of zoning paperwork while fluorescent lights flickered overhead like tired insects. My fingers were gray from old ink and carbon copy dust by the time I found it buried inside a tax incentive packet. Willowbrook Heights HOA had signed a community visual arts partnership agreement with the city 4 years earlier to receive property tax reductions on their clubhouse expansion project. Brenda's own signature sat right there in blue ink beside the official seal. The agreement required the HOA to allow approved temporary public art installations on any mixed-use community structure receiving redevelopment credits, including the HOA headquarters building. I read the paragraph 3 times just to make sure my brain was not inventing things out of pure exhaustion. Then I started laughing so hard the security guard looked over from across the room. Brenda had spent years weaponizing rules against everybody else. Grass too tall, wrong mailbox color, decorative lights left out too long after Christmas. She treated bylaws like scripture handed down from a suburban god. And now the same paperwork she proudly signed for tax savings had quietly handed me the biggest legal opening I could have imagined. Outside, the late afternoon sun bounced off downtown windows in sharp golden flashes, while humid summer heat rolled off the pavement. I sat in the van gripping copies of the agreement while the engine ticked softly under the hood. The smell of old paint thinner and fast food wrappers filled the cab. My phone buzzed again. Another HOA email from Brenda. Subject, cease and desist. She demanded I remove all online accusations immediately and threatened legal action for defamation against the association. I stared at the message for a long moment before smiling to myself. Because right then, Brenda Whitmore still thought this was a fight about one wall. She had absolutely no idea I was already planning to turn her entire headquarters into a canvas the whole city would never forget. The first thing Brenda did after realizing people were turning against her was exactly what people like Brenda always do. She doubled down. By Tuesday morning, bright yellow violation notices were taped across my front door like somebody had declared war using office supplies. Unauthorized exterior storage. Improper vehicle appearance. Hazardous paint materials visible from street view. I stood there in gym shorts holding 3 separate fines while cicadas screamed from the maple trees overhead, and the summer heat baked the asphalt hard enough to shimmer. My white transit van sat perfectly legal in my driveway with 2 ladders strapped on top and maybe 6 dried paint drips on the bumper. Apparently that now qualified as neighborhood decay. I laughed under my breath and peeled the notices off the door one at a time. The adhesive left sticky residue on the wood that smelled faintly chemical under the sun. Brenna wanted me angry, wanted me sloppy. But the calmer I stayed, the more reckless she became. Around lunchtime, I drove past the HOA headquarters for the first time since finding the redevelopment agreement. The building sat right in the center of Willowbrook Heights, like a suburban courthouse. Fake brick columns, decorative flower beds, American flag out front fluttering beside a sign bragging about excellence in community standards. The whole place smelled like fresh mulch and expensive insecurity. I parked across the street beside the walking trail and just watched for a while. Residents moved in and out carrying casserole trays and fundraiser decorations for the upcoming Summer Heritage Gala Brenda hosted every year. White folding tents were already stacked beside the entrance. String lights waited in boxes near the patio. Brenda loved events that photographed well. She treated the neighborhood like one giant social media backdrop. Then I noticed something that made the corners of my mouth slowly curl upward. The entire west side of the HOA building was one massive, uninterrupted wall. Smooth pale stucco, nearly 40 feet long and 2 stories high. Perfect projection surface. Perfect public canvas. A warm breeze carried the smell of cut grass through the open van window while I stared at that wall, imagining light crawling across it after dark. Footage, photos, paint, stories. Every fake smile Brenda ever hid behind suddenly felt paper thin. That evening, I called somebody I had not spoken to in over a year. Lena Morales, local mural artist. Purple hair, leather jacket in 90-degree weather. The kind of woman who could turn an abandoned train tunnel into something beautiful with 6 spray cans and pure stubbornness. We met at a little taco place downtown where the tables wobbled and the air smelled like grilled onions and fryer oil. Lena listened quietly while I showed her the footage of Brenda painting over Mason's mural. Her jaw tightened harder with every second. She did this herself? She asked finally. I nodded. Posted it online too. Lena leaned back slowly in the booth. Wow, she muttered. That is the widest HOA thing I have ever seen. For the first time in days, I genuinely laughed. Then I slid the redevelopment agreement across the table. Lena read 2 paragraphs before her eyes widened. Hold on, she whispered. Are you telling me they legally have to allow public art displays? Temporary approved installations, I corrected. And according to city code, projection mapping counts. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere beyond downtown, while neon beer signs buzzed softly behind the counter. Lena stared at me for another long second before breaking into the kind of grin that usually meant trouble was about to become very creative. "Ethan," she said carefully, "please tell me you are planning what I think you are planning." I looked down at the screenshot on my phone showing Brenda smiling beside fresh white paint at 2 in the morning. Then I looked back up at Lena. "No," I said quietly. "I am planning something much bigger." The next 72 hours felt less like planning revenge and more like assembling a stage for a storm nobody saw coming. Every inch of my garage turned into controlled chaos. Extension cords coiled across the concrete floor like sleeping snakes. Projector cases lined the walls beside paint cans and stacks of old mural sketches. The air smelled like sawdust, warm electronics, and aerosol primer. Lena sat cross-legged on the floor editing footage on her laptop, while old punk rock crackled softly through a dusty Bluetooth speaker near the workbench. Every few minutes the garage door rattled open and another artist stepped inside carrying supplies. Marcus brought portable generators from a concert company downtown. Nina showed up with drone equipment packed into hard black cases. A college kid named Tyler rolled in 6 folding tables covered with donated projection screens and battery packs. Nobody asked for money. Nobody hesitated. The second they heard what Brenda did to Mason's mural, people just started showing up. That was the thing Brenda never understood about artists. She thought we were isolated weirdos painting walls for attention. But creative people survive because we build communities in places everybody else ignores. By Thursday afternoon, the garage looked less like a workspace and more like mission control. Lena stood beside a giant whiteboard mapping projection angles while sweat rolled down her temple in the 94-degree heat. "If we mount 2 projectors from the walking trail and 1 from the clubhouse parking lot, we can cover the entire west wall," she said, drawing arrows with a black marker. "But we need city approval first." I reached into my toolbox and slid the redevelopment agreement across the table again. Already handled. Earlier that morning, I met with the Cultural Arts Review Board downtown. Tiny office. Smelled like old carpet and printer toner. I half expected some bureaucratic nightmare, but the second they saw the footage of Brenda repainting the mural, their expressions changed fast. One older board member actually removed his glasses and muttered, "Well, that was incredibly stupid of them." Turns out city officials do not love it when wealthy HOAs destroy approved memorial artwork in the middle of the night. By lunchtime, our temporary public projection permit had been approved for Saturday evening. Completely legal, completely documented, completely unstoppable. And Brenda still had no clue. She spent those same days spiraling online instead. Every hour brought another defensive community post from her account. The association acted appropriately. False narratives are spreading. Professional standards must be maintained. But the comments kept getting worse. Somebody leaked screenshots of older HOA violations she sent to military families over porch decorations. Another resident posted photos of her measuring grass with a ruler. People who had stayed silent for years suddenly smelled blood in the water. The entire neighborhood atmosphere shifted from fearful to hungry. Friday evening, I drove past the HOA headquarters again just before sunset. Workers were already setting up the gala outside. White linen tablecloths snapped gently in the wind. Caterers carried trays through the clubhouse doors while jazz music floated softly across the parking lot from soundcheck speakers. Brenda stood near the entrance wearing a cream-colored pantsuit and directing volunteers like a movie producer preparing for opening night. The gold sunlight caught her hair perfectly while she smiled and shook hands beside flower arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She looked proud, relaxed, untouchable. I sat inside the van with the engine idling quietly beneath me and watched her through the windshield for nearly a minute. The dashboard smelled faintly like old coffee and paint thinner. Then my phone buzzed. Lena had sent the final projection test image. I opened it and stared at the screen. Brenda's own HOA building covered top to bottom in light, photos, timestamps, permit records, and Mason's restored mural stretching 40 feet wide across the wall she legally could not stop us from using. Outside, Brenda laughed at something one of the board members said while string lights flickered alive around the patio. She still thought Saturday night belonged to her. That was about to become the most expensive assumption of her entire life. Saturday arrived hot and heavy, like the air itself knew something was coming. By 6 in the evening, Willowbrook Heights looked like a magazine cover pretending to be a neighborhood. Golf carts rolled slowly down spotless streets while guests in pastel dresses and linen jackets drifted toward the HOA's Summer Heritage Gala carrying bottles of wine and fake smiles. String lights glowed above the clubhouse patio, casting soft gold reflections across polished tables and decorative fountains. Somewhere near the entrance, a jazz trio played smooth background music that mixed with the smell of grilled steak, expensive perfume, and freshly watered grass. The whole event looked painfully perfect. Exactly the kind of polished, suburban fantasy Brenda Whitmore spent years trying to manufacture, which made what happened next even better. I parked my van beside the walking trail just after sunset, while the last orange streaks disappeared behind the trees. The generators hummed softly in the cargo area behind me, vibrating faintly through the floorboards beneath my boots. Lena checked projector alignment from a folding chair, while Marcus secured extension cables behind a hedge line near the parking lot. Nobody spoke much. We had already rehearsed everything twice. Every angle, every timing cue, every backup system. Across the street, laughter floated from the clubhouse patio while champagne glasses clinked under hanging lights. Brenda stood near the entrance greeting guests like royalty at a fundraiser banquet. Cream-colored dress, gold jewelry catching the patio lights. Perfect posture, perfect smile. The kind of smile people practice in mirrors before listing houses above market value. At exactly 8:47 p.m., Lena looked over at me from behind her laptop. "Ready?" she asked quietly. I stared across the street at the giant blank west wall of the HOA headquarters glowing pale under landscape lighting. The same wall Brenda legally agreed to make available for public art 4 years earlier because she wanted tax breaks for the clubhouse expansion. Funny how greed always leaves fingerprints. I took a slow breath. The humid night air smelled like mulch, diesel exhaust, and summer rain trapped inside hot concrete. Then I nodded once. Marcus flipped the generator switch. The deep mechanical rumble rolled through the darkness like distant thunder. A second later, every projector ignited at once. Light exploded across the HOA building, so suddenly people gasped loud enough to hear it from across the street. 40 feet of crystal-clear projection swallowed the west wall in color and motion. Mason's mural returned first. Wings spread wide across the stucco surface, glowing brighter and larger than it ever looked on my garage wall. The crowd fell silent almost instantly. Then the footage started. Security camera clips filled the building one after another. Brenda standing under floodlights at 2:13 in the morning. HOA workers rolling white paint over Mason's face. Timestamps glowing blue across the wall like evidence in a courtroom. The audio echoed through portable speakers hidden near the trail. Now the neighborhood looks civilized again. Brenda's own voice cut through the gala music sharp as broken glass. The entire patio froze. Somebody dropped a champagne flute. I watched Brenda's smile disappear in real time from across the parking lot. Her face drained pale under the string lights while heads slowly turned toward her from every table. Then came the second projection layer. Screenshots of violation notices. Photos residents anonymously submitted all week. Fines for military flags. Citations over garden decorations. Emails threatening elderly homeowners over mailbox paint. One after another. The wall became a living archive of every petty power trip Brenda spent years hiding behind community language and HOA letterheads. Phones came out everywhere. Guests started recording. Cars slowed along the road beside the walking trail. Even houses farther down the block began lighting up as neighbors stepped outside to watch. The jazz trio stopped playing entirely. Across the street, Brenda finally snapped out of her frozen panic and started screaming at somebody near the entrance while pointing wildly toward the projection wall. But by then it was already too late. The entire neighborhood had finally seen behind the curtain, and no amount of white paint was ever going to cover it again. Brenda Whitmore made the mistake every fake authority figure eventually makes. She forgot cameras work both ways. The second the projections lit up the building, she stopped acting like a polished HOA president and started acting like somebody watching their entire reputation slide down a storm drain in real time. I could see it from across the parking lot. Her shoulders stiffened. Her smile cracked apart. One hand clutched the edge of a banquet table hard enough to wrinkle the white tablecloth while guests slowly backed away from her like heat spreading from a fire nobody wanted to stand near. The wall behind her kept changing every few seconds. New footage, new screenshots, new timestamps. Every projection brighter than the last against the pale stucco surface. The giant restored image of Mason towered above all of it, watching silently over the entire scene, while soft projector fans hummed beside the trail like giant mechanical insects. Then came the audio clip that really broke the room. Lena triggered the HOA board meeting recording somebody anonymously sent us that afternoon. Brenda's voice echoed across the patio through hidden speakers. Calm, condescending, cold. If we let one mural stay, the neighborhood starts looking lower class. You could actually hear people gasp. A man near the dessert table muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath, while somebody else quietly set down their wine glass and walked away from the patio entirely. Brenda spun around searching for whoever was controlling the projection system, but every direction she turned just revealed more residents filming her with their phones. Tiny glowing screens surrounded her from all sides now. That was the thing about public humiliation. Once it starts, people stop pretending not to notice. 2 police cruisers rolled into the parking lot about 10 minutes later, their headlights sweeping slowly across the clubhouse lawn. Brenda nearly sprinted toward them. Even from across the street, I could hear the panic in her voice rising above the crowd noise while she pointed aggressively at the building. One officer listened with crossed arms while the other studied the projection permit Lena handed over beside the walking trail. Warm night air carried the smell of gasoline and fresh-cut grass between us, while cicadas buzzed loudly from the trees overhead. After maybe 30 seconds, the older officer simply nodded, folded the permit back up, and handed it to Brenda. Then he walked away. The look on her face when she realized the police were not shutting us down was almost surreal. Like watching somebody discover gravity stopped working the wrong direction. Behind her, the projections shifted again. Now the entire wall displayed enlarged copies of HOA expense reports Lena managed to pull from public filings. Landscaping reimbursements, catering charges, thousands spent on community image consulting. Meanwhile, residents had been fined over mailbox paint and flower pots. People started murmuring louder now. Angry louder. A gray-haired veteran I recognized from 2 streets overstepped toward the patio and shouted, "You fined my wife $200 for a flag bracket while spending this." More voices joined in after that. Questions. Complaints. Years of resentment finally cracking open all at once under 40 feet of projected evidence. And right in the middle of it stood Brenda Whitmore, looking smaller every second. Sweat glistened along her hairline beneath the patio lights, while her carefully rehearsed confidence dissolved under the weight of public attention she could no longer control. Then the final projection appeared. A side-by-side image filled the entire building. On the left, Mason's original mural glowing warm and alive against my garage wall. On the right, Brenda rolling white paint across his face at 2:17 in the morning with her own HOA logo visible on the jacket sleeve beside her. Underneath both images, Lena added one final sentence in giant white letters. Some people build communities. Others just paint over them. Silence hit the entire parking lot for one long, heavy second. Then somebody started clapping. The applause spread slowly at first. One pair of hands. Then another. Then suddenly the entire walking trail beside the clubhouse sounded like rolling thunder under the summer night sky. Sharp claps echoed off parked cars and brick facades while projector light flickered across stunned faces in the crowd. Brenda stood frozen in the middle of it all, gripping the edge of a banquet chair so tightly her knuckles looked almost white under the patio lights. For years she controlled every conversation in Willowbrook Heights with violation notices and fake smiles. But now, nobody was looking at her for approval anymore. They were looking at her like they finally recognized what she really was. The jazz trio quietly packed their instruments without waiting for instructions. Caterers stopped serving food entirely. Half the guests had their phones raised recording every second, while livestream comments flooded across Lena's tablet faster than she could scroll. 10,000 viewers. 20,000. 40,000. Somebody clipped the projection footage and posted it online with the caption, "HOA president gets exposed by giant building." Within an hour, it was spreading across local pages all over Ohio. I leaned against the side of my van listening to the low hum of the generators beneath the cheering crowd while warm night wind pushed through the trees overhead. The air smelled like electricity, fresh grass, and expensive candles melting on abandoned dinner tables across the patio. Then the final crack inside the HOA board happened right in front of everybody. A man named Richard Barlow stepped away from the clubhouse entrance holding a stack of folders against his chest. Richard had been HOA treasurer for almost 6 years. Quiet guy. Always looked uncomfortable during meetings. The kind of man who spent his entire life avoiding conflict until conflict finally cornered him anyway. He stared at the projections for a long moment before walking directly toward the police officers near the trail. Even from 30 feet away, I could hear the strain in his voice. "I need to report financial misconduct," he said. The entire crowd went dead silent again. Brenda spun around so fast one of her heels nearly slipped on the pavement. "Richard," she snapped sharply, "what are you doing?" But Richard never looked back at her. He just handed the folders to the older officer. Expense reports, reimbursement forms, duplicate payments. Thousands of dollars spent through HOA funds on private landscaping work at Brenda's own house, disguised as community beautification projects. The officer flipped through the paperwork while another patrol car quietly pulled into the lot behind him. Brenda's face lost what little color it still had left. Suddenly, every perfectly polished detail about her started falling apart under the lights. Sweat streaked through her makeup. Her hair clung unevenly near her temples from humidity and panic. She kept trying to speak over the crowd, but nobody listened anymore. The authority in her voice had evaporated. It was honestly strange to watch, like seeing a stage prop collapse once somebody leaned on it too hard. Across the wall behind her, Mason's mural still glowed bright and enormous above the projections. Wings stretched over the entire scene, while the final sentence remained fixed underneath in giant white letters. Some people build communities. Others just paint over them. Residents who had stayed quiet for years finally started speaking openly now. Mrs. Alvarez stepped forward, describing harassment letters over garden decorations. The retired veteran from 2 streets over-talked about fines for military flags during Memorial Day weekend. Even the teenage kid who delivered newspapers admitted Brenda once threatened to tow his bike for leaning against the clubhouse fence. One by one, stories poured out into the open air, while police officers quietly took notes beneath the glow of projector light. Brenda kept insisting everything was being taken out of context, but every defense sounded weaker than the last. Because the truth about bullies is simple. They only seem powerful while everybody else stays isolated. The second people start comparing stories, the illusion dies fast. And standing there watching the HOA headquarters transformed into a 40-foot monument to every lie Brenda Whitmore ever hid behind, I realized something almost funny. She thought she erased one mural to protect the image of her neighborhood. Instead, she accidentally gave the entire town a wall big enough to expose everything. 2 months later, the west wall of the Willowbrook Heights clubhouse still carried faint outlines where the projection lights once washed across the stucco like fire. You could see it best around sunset when the light hit the building sideways. Ghost shadows of wings. Old color traces buried beneath fresh paint. The irony made me smile every single time I drove past it. Brenda Whitmore resigned 3 days after the gala. Officially, it was for personal reasons. Unofficially, the city opened a financial investigation into HOA spending practices, 3 board members stepped down, and half the neighborhood suddenly discovered they were tired of living under somebody else's fake kingdom. Funny how courage spreads once one person stops being afraid. The local news stations ran the story for almost 2 weeks straight. Every broadcast showed the same clip of the projection wall lighting up the clubhouse, while Brenda stared up at her own midnight repaint footage in absolute disbelief. By then, the internet had already turned the whole thing into a symbol. Artists from Cleveland, Chicago, and even Portland started reposting Mason's mural online with captions about public memory and neighborhood power trips. Lena framed screenshots from the projection night and hung them inside her studio downtown beside old concert posters and spray paint sketches. She called it the Suburban Revolution exhibit. I called it karma with extension cords. As for me, I finally repainted Mason's mural 3 weeks later. Same wall, same garage, same wings stretching wide across the brick like they never left. But this time I kept one section untouched near the bottom corner. A rough, uneven patch of Brenda's white paint still visible beneath the restored colors. Most people asked why I did not completely cover it. The truth is simple. I wanted people to remember what happened there. Some scars deserve to stay visible. Saturday mornings feel different now in Willowbrook Heights. Quieter, softer somehow. Kids ride bikes past my house again without parents nervously steering them away from the problem property. Mrs. Alvarez planted sunflowers beside her mailbox after years of being told bright flowers looked messy. The veteran down the street mounted his American flag bracket again, and nobody complained this time. Even the clubhouse changed. Last month, the HOA board voted to officially convert the west exterior wall into a rotating community art space under city partnership guidelines. The same rule Brenda signed years ago, trying to save money, became the exact thing that permanently took control away from people like her. Last week, a group of high school art students painted their first mural there. Bright colors, big messy shapes. The smell of fresh paint drifted across the walking trail while families stood nearby, taking photos under string lights. Nobody measured grass. Nobody handed out fines. Nobody cared if things looked a little imperfect. And standing there watching those kids paint across the same wall that once displayed every ugly truth hidden inside this neighborhood, I realized something Mason probably understood long before I ever did. Communities are not built by control. They are built by people feeling safe enough to leave a mark behind. Sometimes that mark is paint. Sometimes it is memory. Sometimes it is finally refusing to stay quiet. The last time I saw Brenda Whitmore, she was loading cardboard boxes into the back of a silver SUV while rain clouds rolled low over the subdivision. No makeup, no perfect smile, no little queen of the neighborhood posture. Just another person trying very hard not to look at the consequences parked around her. She glanced once toward my garage before closing the trunk. Her eyes landed on Mason's mural glowing softly in the late afternoon light. Then she looked away first. The air smelled like rain and fresh paint again as I stood in my driveway listening to distant laughter from the walking trail behind the clubhouse. And for the first time in a long while, the neighborhood finally felt like it belonged to actual people instead of rules. Because Brenda thought white paint could erase a story. Turns out all she really did was give the whole town a bigger wall to read it from.